Hi, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is begin our conclusion to the semester by getting into our third book and beginning our third book report, looking at The Rich Get Richer and The Poor Get Prison. And in doing so, what we're doing here is looking at the subtopic of social class. Although there is a lot of talk about the subtopic of race, which is important, but what we're going to do for our purposes and for the purposes of the report is to concentrate on the main variable under examination, the variable social class. And we'll look at that variable in reference to the institution of the criminal justice system. So, to begin today, what I wanted to do is briefly go through the report guidelines with you. So overall, we can look at the author's thesis. So basically, they argue that the organization of the criminal justice system, kind of as is not only ineffective in terms of it doesn't do its job in decreasing crime, but also it's biased towards the wealthy. So when it advantages the wealthy, how the system is organized, thus it will disadvantage the non-wealthy. So that's kind of the main argument being put forth throughout the book. And that's what we're going to unpack when we go through it, kind of lecture by lecture, aspect of the book report by aspect of the book report. And so the report guidelines, similar to the first two reports, you'll be looking at three full pages, double spaced. And then for the first part of the paper, you'll be looking at how often the wealthy perform by definition criminal activities, but typically these activities, although they fit the definition of crime, go unseen and untreated as harmful for society. So we'll talk about those specific activities, and we'll get into that more when our next class begins. So the next part of the paper gets into how class does operate as an influential variable when it comes to being part of the criminal justice system. So when you kind of are exposed to it, when you enter it, and kind of when you're through with it, kind of every step along the way, there's class bias evident throughout the criminal justice system. And finally, in the last part of the paper, you'll be looking at basically the author's recommendations or suggestions in terms of how you can change the system and how those changes of the system will help the system become more just, will help the system become more effective. So overall, that's kind of the layout of the book report. And also keep in mind, like the first two, you'll be using the text, you'll be citing the text to support your ideas. So just a little bit of a background, a little bit of an introduction to the book today. So overall, again, the main focus is examining the role of social class when it comes to the criminal justice system. So again, the criminal justice system is made up, many different branches. You have kind of police force, you have courts, you have the penal system. So we'll be looking at kind of different aspects of the criminal justice system with reference to class, but also a little bit of a race discussion is thrown in there as well. And so again, the thesis we can say is basically the system's organization advantages the wealthy, thus it disadvantages the non-wealthy. And kind of the sub thesis within the overall thesis is that not only is the system biased against the non wealthy, it also is ineffective overall. So, maybe on the one hand, you would say, well, that's the way it works. If you have money in a capitalist system, you're going to have advantages. If you lack money in a capitalist system, you're going to face disadvantages. Maybe you're going to be okay with that if the system itself works. But not only is the bias there, what's also evident is the system is ineffective in terms of decreasing crime. And so overall, that's what we're looking at. And what we need to keep in mind is a couple things. So, number one, you would like to believe that when somebody enters the criminal justice system, whether it be pulled over by an officer, being tried on something in a court, or being sentenced on something, you like to think that it's all about kind of the case itself and the action of the individuals more so than the class background of the individuals. But the argument here is actually that class background that matters, even though you may be doing the same types of crime. Class is going to make the crime be seen and treated differently throughout the system. And so, secondly, what we need to talk about is we're not criticizing the people within the system. So we're not criticizing the parole officers. We're not criticizing the judges. We're not criticizing individuals kind of working in prisons or the police officers. We're not criticizing the people within the system. We're kind of critiquing the system as a whole. So, overall, you have to play by the rules of the game. And so if the rules are ineffective, if the rules are bad, then again, it's not the players who play it, it's the rules themselves. So the institution as organized. So that's the critique. If you want to change the system, we're not talking about changing people. We're talking about changing the system as a whole to make it more just and to make it more effective. So, with that said, the authors start to get into the idea that, again, the system itself is not only biased, but it's ineffective at reducing crime. So, rather than reducing crime, crime simply reproduced. Crime rates maybe fluctuate a little bit up and down, but for the most part, they're relatively high. And that high kind of rate of crime is in comparison to other countries similar to ours, but also it's in comparison to ourselves. And so, kind of what's going on in terms of causing these higher crime rates compared to our past, compared to other countries today. And so, one focus they get into is ineffective responses to crime. So, in other words, we kind of know through research, we know what causes crime or what kind of promotes the likelihood of crimes being committed. Poor economies correlate with higher rates of crime. Low job opportunities correlate with higher rates of crime. Poor education, health problems for individuals, again, correlate to crimes being of a highly likelihood. And so, if we know that, if we kind of know what correlates, what promotes crimes being committed, you think we would focus on those things for the responses, but we don't. We don't focus on improving local, regional economies. We don't focus on improving job opportunities. We don't focus on the health of communities or the education of community members. And basically, the response to crime typically is about getting tougher. You want to build more prisons, you want harsher laws, you want harsher sentences, you want more policing. And all of this, kind of goes around the problems that are creating the crime to begin with. So, as I say here, there's a mismatch. We kind of know what causes crime, but how we respond to it kind of ignores those causes. So, when you ignore the known causes of crime, you're actually practicing ineffective responses. So if you want to have more effective responses to crime, you would focus on the causes, the poor economies, the lower poor education, the health of individuals and communities, and the job opportunities. But when you ignore those things and just try to be tough on crime, basically crime is not going to decrease. You're simply going to reproduce it rather than reduce it. So that's what we're looking at in terms of a little bit of background into your book and a little bit of background into your report. So again, you can say the thesis is focusing on that bias of how the system is biased towards wealthier individuals, thus it works against non-wealthy individuals. And also that sub-thesis is not only is the system biased, but it's also ineffective in terms of how it's operating. Rather than reducing crime, it reproduces it. And so, again, I'll reiterate the point that we're not trying to criticize the people within the system, but rather kind of critique the system as a whole. If you want to be more effective, if you want to be fair for individuals, basically you need to change the system, the rules of the game, and that's what the book is focusing on. So we'll leave that there for today. And as we kind of start to move forward in the next couple class periods, or turn our attention to the book in reference to the book report. So again, I'll leave that there for today. I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving break, and I will see you shortly.